You learn a lot about a person by what they don't tell you. Not the big things. Those usually come out loud enough to hear, but the small, stupid details. The way she stops talking when she comes into a room, a new perfume that smells like someone else's confidence, the clean line where a photo used to be on the mantle. For 20 years I thought I knew Jessica. Turns out I only knew the version of her she wanted me to see. We had what most people call a good life. I sold hardware to big box stores, not glamorous, steady money, the kind that keeps a roof over a head and a soccer camp paid for. Jessica managed the office at a small design firm. We raised Sarah together, paid into college, learned the art of forgiving tiny offenses so the big ones never had to come up. We were the kind of boring that looks like safety. The kind of boring that lulled you into thinking there wasn't anything left to protect. The first time I noticed the shift, it was a smirk. Small, quick. The kind of thing a man shows when he's cataloging something he thinks is his. Mark Diamond, the managing partner at the law firm Jessica worked with, wore his money like cologne. He had a watch that cost more than my truck, a laugh that laughed at the room, and Stella, a trophy wife who never learned the difference between charm and cruelty. Mark was the sort of man who'd tell a joke that needed permission to be called a joke, and if you didn't laugh, he'd make sure you regretted it. It was a firm dinner, which was supposed to be an excuse to drink and pretend work was play. Mark danced with Jessica, and when he led her back to our table he did something small and precise. He looked at me with that half smile, as if to say, "See? She likes me. She chose me to spin her around the room." She winked back at him like they'd conspired to hurt me with a glance. I felt my face go hot. Jessica laughed it off. "He always does that," she said, squeezing my hand like we shared the same private joke. I wanted to tell her I wasn't in on it. You think you can let something slide. You tell yourself 100 rational things. Maybe I'm needy. Maybe I ran my mouth. Maybe it's nothing. But the smirk lodged in a part of me that doesn't forget. After that night I started noticing patterns. Late meetings that bled into dinners, a new blouse she didn't wear for me, a story about Mark staying late to close a file that had a little too much in it for my liking. Nothing obvious, nothing you could point to in court. But like a hairline crack in a window, it spread. I did the thing men in the movies do because we think we're clever or because we simply want the truth more than we want to believe. I spied, not because I wanted to prove her guilty and break her, but because I wanted to be proven wrong. I figured if I found nothing, I could go back to normal. That was arrogance disguised as hope. I bought cameras, tiny things that fit in smoke detectors and alarm clocks. I placed a pen recorder on the kitchen counter and left a tracking dongle in her car's glove compartment. Every move I made felt less like evidence gathering and more like bargaining with my own conscience. I paused at every doorway, feeling like a bad guy in my own life. Spying on the woman who fell asleep next to me for 2 decades felt wrong the way eating when you're starving feels wrong. Necessary and disgusting at the same time. The first week there was nothing. Jessica left the house each morning with her tote and came home in the evening with the same easy smile. She made me dinner the night I left for a conference and kissed me like she meant it. Those were the days I almost deleted the cameras. Almost. Pride kept me awake. Suspicion kept me clicking. Then one Friday morning I pulled the recordings like a man pulling a splinter. There, 32 minutes after midnight, was a face I recognized from the courtroom. Mark in my kitchen, his back to the camera as he helped Jessica with her coat. They laughed too loud for 1:12 a.m. The video cut and shifted to my bedroom camera an hour later, clothes off, laughter softer, words I couldn't fully make out. It was not a still life of betrayal. It was a living, breathing proof of a life that had been folding itself away from me. I sat there on the attic floor with the laptop and the recording and felt the air get thin. The world outside went on selling screws and coffee and small talk. Inside the house, in our bedroom, someone else had stepped into the space where I thought I belonged. There are moments you freeze in because time does what time does. It slows and narrows until only the immediate decision sits in front of you like a plate of cold dinner. Do I confront her? Do I call him? Do I take pictures to my friends, shout it from a rooftop, crack open the life we built like a walnut and let the pieces spill? I didn't do any of those things that night. What I did was something less dramatic and more like survival. I copied e-files to 3 different drives, packed one into my briefcase, and left for the city. I told myself distance would let me think clearly. I told myself I needed to breathe. I told myself 1,000 versions of what I wanted the truth to be, and none of them helped. On the train, while the city blurred by, I listened to the recording again and again. The rustle of the bed covers. A name. Mark's voice, low, with something like ownership hidden in it. Jessica's laugh, but not mine inside it. The sound of two people constructing a secret. When I got off at my stop, I realized I was beyond the point of being a man who'd been hurt. I was a man who had been handed a decision he hadn't asked for, to tear down or to build something new out of the rubble. I didn't know which would be easier. I didn't know which would be more honest. But one thing I did know, whatever I chose next, it would not be done in the heat of the attic. It would be done with the coldness of a plan. I slept in a motel that night with the laptop under my arm. When I closed my eyes, I could still hear the laugh. When I opened them, I started to plan. I could have gone back the night I watched the clip and started a war. I could have driven home, torn the house apart, and made the kind of scene that leaves everyone with neat, painful scars. Instead, I drove back like nothing had happened, carried my briefcase up the stairs, and sat down at the kitchen table while Jessica told me about a new client who was so demanding. My face must have been a stone. She kissed my cheek, asked if I wanted coffee, and I said yes. Playing normal felt worse than the spying. It felt like betrayal of a different sort, like I was agreeing to live a lie because it was easier than the truth. But it bought me time. Time to breathe, time to plan, time to be cruel in a way that wasn't cruel in the moment. I spent the weekend combing through everything I had. The recordings were the skeleton, but I needed meat on the bones. Texts, receipts, parking logs, anything that tied Mark and Jessica together in ways that would be hard to smooth over with excuses. The laptop held more than one secret. When you record someone long enough, you catch the friction of habit, the tiny slips that become patterns. There were calendars opened on Mark's name, hotel confirmations, a takeaway order delivered to Mark's building at 3 a.m. with Jessica's card used for it. A stupid thing to do, but human, and humans are sloppy with sin. I hired someone. I hated myself for it the first time I handed over cash, and I hated myself more when I checked the agency's license and their rates and realized this was standard, not extravagant. I didn't want to do the work of looking through garbage or following cars. I wanted someone who could give me facts that a judge would care about. The man I hired was quiet and efficient and smelled faintly of cheap coffee. He gave me a notebook and a look that said he'd seen men like me before, men who looked like they'd been ordinary until they weren't. The pie dug up things I didn't imagine. Mark had been getting more involved with the design firm on the books than was public. There were emails where he pushed clients toward Jessica as if grooming her for a promotion. There were late-night Uber receipts traced to a neighborhood 2 towns over. There was a line in a travel itinerary that suggested Mark had brought Jessica to a business retreat, and the business side of the retreat was thin as tissue paper. Each new piece felt like picking at a scab. Painful, necessary, not particularly clean. I learned, too, that Mark and Stella were on the rocks. She'd been away more often. That didn't make what Jessica did forgivable. It made it easier to see how it happened. Opportunity plus someone willing to take it. While the pie worked, I called a divorce attorney. That call felt like an admission I'd been avoiding for months. He listened without flinching and gave me terms. Temporary orders, asset freezes, the ways the court looks at custody and living arrangements. He was careful where I wasn't, laying out timelines and the paperwork I would need. He didn't tell me revenge would be satisfying. He told me it would be messy, expensive, and slow. That suited me fine. Slow let me be precise. There is a part of you that keeps tally even when you say you don't. The house payments, the truck, the retirement accounts, the life insurance that names her as beneficiary. They all sat in my head like bullets waiting to be loaded. Take everything away from her sounded simpler in the motel bed, but in practice it meant leverage, timing, and the patience of someone who knows spreadsheets better than heartbeats. I started making moves I wouldn't have admitted to myself a month earlier. I called the bank and set alerts on joint accounts. I changed passwords to online accounts that would have let someone siphon money or reorder things under my name. I made photocopies of titles and deeds and tucked them in a safety deposit box with the lawyer's name on the rental agreement. I did it all with a hands-off calm, like a man arranging his tools before he starts to work. But revenge isn't only legal. Reputation is currency, and Mark had spent his life building a polished image. He was the kind of man who believed in charm and power. He believed, perhaps, that those could be used to smooth any small indiscretion. He did not believe, couldn't have imagined, that someone would methodically pull the threads of both his marriage and his career until the whole thing unspooled. I debated a dozen ways to do that. I could expose them to Stella and let her do the damage nobody wants to be responsible for. I could take everything to the press and watch the firm burn. I could send anonymous packages, leak emails, make quiet phone calls to people who track professional ethics. Each option had risks, legal, moral, collateral, and each left a different mess for Sarah, for other people who hadn't chosen any of this. There's a moment when anger becomes strategy and you find you prefer the latter. Anger is a hot, hungry thing that wants immediate satisfaction. Strategy is a cold, patient animal that eats slowly and leaves the bones. I wanted bones. I wanted the facts to do the work so later, when everything collapsed, my hands would be clean enough to look at myself in a mirror. The first piece of the strategy was simple: protect Sarah. I couldn't let our daughter be a casualty because of my plans. I called my sister, told her an edited truth, that things were complicated and I might need help for a while, and arranged for Sarah to spend more time at her place. It was the part of the revenge that felt least like revenge, a parental instinct to shield the child while grown people dismantled their lives. Next, I played the role of the reasonable husband in public. I went to work. I mowed the lawn. I picked up Sarah from practice. I kissed Jessica in front of the neighbor when he asked about our weekend. Inside, the machine was running. The pie fed me reports, and the lawyer told me what to fill out and when. I drafted envelopes that would one day be mailed to insurance companies and HR departments and a wife whose name I practiced spelling on a legal pad. But there was a line I kept circling and not crossing: humiliation. I told myself I wanted justice, not cruelty for its own sake. There is a difference between making someone accountable and making someone suffer because you can. I tried, with varying degrees of success, to keep that distinction sacred. Still, there were nights I lay awake picturing Jessica's face when the bank froze her cards, when her boss called to say an investigation was opened, when her friends stopped answering her texts. That image burned brighter than any lesson I told myself I wanted to teach. And then the pie handed me something I hadn't asked for but which felt like a gift: a string of voicemails between Jessica and Mark, recorded on a phone left in the car. Voices are intimate. Hearing them together without the pretense of normal life made the betrayal feel like a physical thing. In one voicemail, Jessica apologized for not telling me, then laughed as if the apology had weight at all. In another, Mark told her to be careful with the calendar entries and to keep it under 30 minutes when she used the office. The arrogance of it, the assumption that they could compartmentalize other people's lives, was almost funny, except it wasn't. That night I didn't carouse in my motel or drink myself numb. I sat in my truck with the engine off and the town's sodium lights pooling on the dashboard. I thought about my father, who'd always said that when someone shows you who they are, you should believe them. That night I believed them. I believed that Jessica had made a choice and that Mark had willingly taken it, and I believed that the only way to get anything resembling justice was to be smarter and slower and firmer than either of them. The plan, such as it was, took shape in my head like a map. Lawsuits, custody, timing. A clean pull on the threads that held their little secret together. Not because I wanted to hurt for the sake of hurting, but because I wanted the consequences to match the betrayal. I wanted a life rearranged in proportion to the life that had been taken from me. When I finally locked the motel door behind me, there was a quiet satisfaction that felt almost clinical. Revenge, I decided, would be an unglamorous thing. It would be paperwork and patience and the slow, grinding turn of institutions that take time to notice and then act. It would be less cinematic than anger and more effective. And somewhere in the dark, I promised myself one ugly thing. When it was over, when the accounts were balanced and the custody schedules set and the faces they'd exchange at holiday dinners were strained and brittle, I would stand in the ruins and count what was left. I don't know when exactly I stopped seeing Jessica as my wife. Maybe it was the third time I listened to that voicemail. Maybe it was when I saw the hotel charge on our joint credit card, the one that cleared while I was out buying groceries for her birthday dinner. But at some point, she went from being my person to a person I used to know, and that realization didn't bring rage. It brought clarity. By the time I'd finished working with the pie and lawyer to line up every document, every timestamp, every bank record, I had something better than anger. I had leverage. The moment to move had to be right. I didn't want drama. I didn't want some hallway shouting match or to play the gotcha scene like some soap opera fool. I wanted calm, cold precision. The kind of move that left her with nothing to say and nowhere to run. So I picked a date, April 22nd. It was the anniversary of our first date, 21 years ago. We'd gone to a tiny Italian place that no longer existed, where she laughed at how nervous I was trying to pronounce gnocchi. Back then, she said my nervousness was charming. Now I knew better. She liked control, and I gave it to her without knowing. I chose that date because I figured she'd never forget it. She wouldn't remember it was the anniversary, not anymore, but she'd remember it became the day her whole world changed. The day she lost everything she didn't realize she'd taken for granted. The days leading up to it were all about control. I smiled more. I cooked dinner twice. I even left a stupid bouquet of sunflowers on the kitchen table. Not because I wanted her back, but because I needed her relaxed. I needed her to think the distance between us had started to shrink, that maybe I'd softened. People are more careless when they feel safe. I wanted her careless, and she was. She slipped up. I saw it in her phone. She was texting him again. Always under a fake name, this time, Ellen. But I checked the number, same as always. I didn't even feel surprised anymore. That was the scariest part. The numbness of it, like finding a leak in a boat you were already bailing water from. Just one more hole in something you stopped trying to keep afloat. 3 days before April 22nd, I sent the package to Stella. I made sure it was untraceable. New envelope, new printer, different city postmark. Inside, a USB stick with screenshots, the emails, the hotel receipts, the photo of Jessica leaning against Mark's chest outside that condo building in the South End. Not kissing, just intimate, close enough that no spouse would need a second opinion. I didn't write a note. I figured she'd get the message. Stella wasn't the kind to go quietly. I'd seen her tear through a dinner party once just because someone made fun of her shoes. She had the kind of anger that didn't settle, it exploded. Mark had married a firecracker, and I was handing her the match. That was phase 1. Burn his life down without lifting a finger. Phase 2? That was Jessica. My lawyer and I had the divorce papers ready. All I needed to do was serve them at the right time. I waited until the morning of the 22nd. Jessica was in the kitchen, flipping through her phone, half dressed for work and sipping the coffee I'd made her. I handed her a folder and said, quietly, "You'll want to sit down." She didn't. She opened the folder, skimmed the top page, and her face drained fast. "These are divorce papers," she said, like she was discovering it for the first time. "Why?" "I don't." I stopped her before she could lie. "There's a second folder in there. It has photos, emails, GPS logs, receipts. I've got backups. 3 of them, in different places. One copy went to Stella 3 days ago." Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. She sat. I stood. I didn't need to sit anymore. "I know everything, Jess," I said. "Every single thing." She didn't cry, not at first. She just stared at the folder like it was written in another language. Then, slowly, her hands began to shake. "It was a mistake," she finally said. "I never meant for it to." "Don't," I said. "Don't insult me by pretending you tripped and fell into an affair." She went quiet again. The silence between us was so thick it felt like another person had entered the room. "You said you were working late. You said you were tired. You said you loved me." I looked her in the eye then, really looked. "Were any of those true?" She blinked. "I did love you. Past tense," I said. She flinched. "I've already moved most of the savings into a separate account. Everything traceable to me. You'll see the split in the packet. The lawyer filed the restraining order on asset movement this morning. You won't be able to drain anything, just in case you get cute." "That's not fair." I almost. T laughed. "You want to talk about fair?" And that's when she cried. Not loud, just a single sob, and then a breakdown so slow it was like watching a wall crumble one brick at a time. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she whispered. But she did. The betrayal wasn't just physical. It was the years of dishonesty, the lies piled on lies, the months I spent thinking I was the problem while she was out letting someone else hold the parts of her that used to belong to me. That was when I walked out of the kitchen, not in rage, not with shouting or slamming, but with something far more devastating. Indifference. I left her there with the folder, the coffee going cold, the silence screaming louder than any words ever could. By noon, the process server had officially filed the papers. Mark's law firm had gotten wind of Stella's reaction. She'd shown up to his office, apparently, with a printout of the screenshots and a voice that could rattle windows. By 3 p.m., I got word that Mark had been put on leave pending an internal ethics review. By sunset, both of them, Mark and Jessica, were scrambling. And me? I was sitting on my sister's porch with a beer in hand, watching Sarah play cards with her cousins, knowing that while the world they built on lies was crashing down, I had already started building something else. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a life that was finally mine again.